Welcome to this week's Opinion Show. Today we're going to be focusing on the events in Ferguson, Missouri. Even though the violence has died down, there's still unresolved issues of why the authorities, both in St. Louis County and in Ferguson itself, were so slow to release essential information, have yet to release key details about the shooting, allowing essentially into this vacuum of information much speculation to flow, and generating the violent protests that have caught the nation's attention and reignited a needed dialogue, in my view, of what race relations are in this country. I am Elizabeth Sullivan. I direct the editorial board for the Northeast Ohio Media Group and the Plain Dealer. And joining me are members of that editorial board, Kevin O'Brien, a columnist and the deputy editorial page editor for the Plain Dealer, and editorial writers Sharon Broussard, Chris Evans, and Pete Krouse. Sharon, you wrote our editorial today on Ferguson. I thought it was a really great editorial. Why don't you start us off on the issues that you see are still need to be discussed and addressed.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I think that there's two very important ones, and you hit on the first one, which is about the lack of essential information that the public needed to know, right in front of their faces. I mean, it took 6 days to release the officer's name. Oftentimes officers are involved in these kind of shootings, and it's happened in our city, and it doesn't take that long, no matter how controversial it might be. So things like that, things about what happened, then the release of the officer's name at the same time that they released the videotape of Michael Brown, strong-arming the store owner, which made it seem as though they were saying, a little tit for tat there, as opposed to kind of standing above the fray. And then I think the other issue was the militarization, which I think is interesting when you read things like the Washington Times and other conservative newspapers. They were just about as shocked and dismayed and not very pleased about either. So I think those are the issues that stand out.
And we should say that the victim in this case, Michael Brown, was 18, a rather large guy, but he was still a teenager and unarmed, and he was black, and he was shot by a white officer in a suburb that is predominantly black and has a predominantly white police force, which, clearly there were some, other underlying issues here as well. Kevin, what was your feeling about, the lessons that we can draw from Ferguson, or that we still need to talk about?
Well, I think the big one is that I'm not going to say whenever. It's unfortunate that in this situation, as it has been in other situations before, the reflex seems to be to choose up sides, instead of waiting for actual evidence to come in, listen to all the witnesses, listen to all the people who might have something worthwhile to say about the material facts of the case. And instead, what we end up seeing in Ferguson, at least, is a mob facing off against a very, spectacularly well-armed set of police. And it's to see it degenerate that fast into that situation is just disheartening.
Yeah, but don't you think that some of the seeds for that were established early on? I mean, they left the body of Michael Brown. You can take a look on YouTube. According to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, it was out there for 4 hours, uncovered, a lot of that time. And in addition, then you did not see city leaders, mayor, city council, people like that, talking to people, reassuring people that they were going to get down to, try to figure out what was going to happen, and everything was going to be unbiased and above board. I mean, there's a lot of things that this city could have done, I think, that involved talking to people, and you didn't see that happen, and I think that should have come. And then maybe that mob response would not have.
I don't think it would have made a bit of difference.
I think it would have.
As well. Chris?
Well, I was going to say, I think what you had initially was you had a peaceful memorial march, and you had all of a sudden the police come in armored vehicles and with military-grade assault rifles, and it was clearly an attempt to suppress public dissent, and that's what triggered, I think, the violent response. And what it reminded me of was in a movie a Transformer movie, but still important. The motto of the police, is protect and serve. And the Decepticons, their police department motto is punish and enslave.
Okay,
and
but
that was the message that was sent.
We actually don't know their motives, and it could simply have been fear, lack of training, lack of leadership, lack of, the kind of appropriate open response that we would like to see when we have an incident of this kind. What do you think, Pete?
Well, yeah, and I think, back to Kevin's point, I mean, there was such a rush to judgment in this situation. I mean, clearly, this kid was unarmed. He was shot by a police officer. It does not look good, but it does deserve a full investigation as to what happened. That has not occurred, and they've been slow, to make progress, and that's not good. But it just seems like every step everybody takes is under such a microscope, and I think they're freaking out a little bit over there. The police. I don't know if they quite know how to handle this themselves. I don't think it means that they're jackbooted thugs. I just think it's like they're overwhelmed, that the eyes of the world are on them right now, and how they're going to respond to this very unfortunate shooting. If this police officer, shot this kid, without any kind of justification, I think it's going to be determined, and there will be punishment, and there will be repercussions, and there should be, and this should lead to the greater dialogue about all the things that Sharon mentioned in terms of not just the militarization of these police forces, but also race relations and so forth. But there has been such a rush to judgment. But I also wanted to say, and I'm part of the media, but I do think that in a lot of cases, sometimes the media prolongs these things. I mean, there are so many TV cameras out there and reporters, and that's great. You have to cover it to make sure that things are done correctly. But I do think there are times when people see all those cameras and they just want to come out there and they want to make a point, they want to make a scene, and the cameras eat it up.
Yeah, I disagree with that. I think you need a strong media presence in a situation like this to...
Strong, but not overwhelming.
Well,
Yeah, but this kind of thing is going to attract overwhelming
Right.
international coverage.
And you need to document it, and you need to be there to hold people accountable.
I'm not saying that for a
media
second.
But the media is terrible at that. The media is not good, especially the 24-hour media that we have today, the incessant television coverage of these things, with most of the time nothing whatsoever to say or
Exactly.
to add to what's known. The media are the worst possible irritant for these situations, and it's exactly what you were saying.
They're not
come in
seeking
and
justice, they're
encourage
seeking
people
ratings.
to just bluster.
But, I think you have to draw a distinction between that sort of, 24/7 talking head situation.
News.
And, reporters, say from the Washington Post, and I understand that
Guardian.
reporter who was arrested was from Cleveland originally, being, essentially arrested for, standing in line to get a hamburger or whatever the circumstance was, that is emblematic and helps the country understand exactly how overwrought the police response was here. Now, I know we might not, all agree on that, but Sharon, what do you think we ought to be talking about going forward? What does this say about reforms that maybe need to be made in Ferguson, but also, as a nation, what we should be working on?
Yeah, I think dialogue is important here. It's pretty clear that, Ferguson had been split probably, down these lines for a long time, and it just all kind of blew up in their faces. I think in many communities, a couple city leaders might have been able to have those kind of connections to walk in and to talk to people and to calm things down, which didn't happen here. And I also, I know that there's a bigger issue here around race, around maybe poverty, or, many people actually in Ferguson are working, but, they're working poor. So there are issues around that too, but, I also hope that we don't forget, the two families involved in this. And, one is the family of Michael Brown, who will be burying their son on Monday, I understand. And then the other is the family of Darren Wilson, whatever may have happened in those, couple minutes that they faced off against each other. And, that's lost as well.
I also think that the Defense Department should stop selling military-grade hardware to small police departments. I don't like that.
Let's look at that, because in fact, if you have a hostage taker in a school building, if you have a terrorist attack, if you have an outbreak of hemorrhagic fever, you actually need equipment to deal with, crowd control. I mean, there are circumstances.
No, I
where-
don't disagree with that, but I mean, I don't know what Ferguson is doing with, armored personnel carriers and military-grade assault
right,
rifle. I mean, it's not,
Well, most communities have who have SWAT capability do have a more regional approach to this. Maybe this wasn't, the
Right.
Ferguson.
But this raises questions about when to use those
Yes,
things.
I
I
agree.
saw the Louisiana commander, Honoré,
Yeah.
I can't remember his name, he was on CNN or someone this morning, and he was like, when my officers were there and it was kind of a crazy situation in Louisiana, I told them, stop pointing your guns at people.
During Katrina.
I will not be
Yeah.
allowing that kind of thing. And he says, people need to know, when to use when to use the equipment and how to use the equipment and how not to use the equipment and inadvertently, create a situation that you don't want to create.
Well, yeah, so there's certainly, a level, I don't know if incompetence is the word, or lack of training or what have you. That does not necessarily mean that there's evil intent on the part of the police. But also, I think that the leadership in that town, the mayor, I don't know what form of government they exactly have, councilmen, whatever, those are the folks that should have been out there trying to quell some of the bad feelings, as opposed to armed police officers. And I wonder.
I really haven't seen the mayor.
That was,
out there.
Sharon's point,
Mayor
and,
Knowles.
Yeah.
and one of the points she made in the editorial we had this morning, which is the missing in action leadership. Kevin, what do you think are kind of the lessons going forward here?
I don't know, because I think there's a tremendous amount that we don't know about what happened and what is happening there. We're getting our information from people who are purveyors of information. I'm not sure we're getting it from people whose job it is to investigate an incident like the one that we've had, or I'm not sure that we understand fully or at all what the city officials are thinking, what the police were thinking. I think it's going to take a long time, and we have to be patient enough to want the truth and to wait and hear what the truth really is, a few weeks hence. It's going to take a while.
Don't you fault the officials there for failing to provide those basic facts so that people knew right at the outset what their understanding of the circumstances was?
I don't know. I would want to know what their thinking was. I mean, I think we will.
But what,
Good Lord willing, we will hear from them in the coming weeks about what they were thinking, why they did or didn't do what they did or didn't do.
but whether you knew the police officer's name right out of the box or not, would that have really mattered?
But I think
I'm not so
Pete,
sure it
but
would.
I think Pete.
It's more
Sharon.
relevant
Go
what
ahead.
the facts of the shooting were.
Right,
Yeah.
but,
Right.
and I think in a town like Ferguson, it's small, I think, the sense was from the reports that were coming in, that people did know who the officer was.
Yeah, on the ground, they
On the
knew,
ground,
certainly.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
it wasn't
right.
publicly announced, but they did know.
Yeah.
But for
So
instance,
it didn't make any difference.
They may have been
It
afraid
gets
of
back to my
repercussions
point.
against that
Right.
police
But
officer.
one of the
The
more
rest of us
telling
didn't know.
stories
But they-
was the fact that they had to go to some private guy to do the autopsy.
I know.
And he couldn't really give an adequate autopsy because he didn't have access to
The clothing
key
and-
photos and other factors that the authorities have. Why do
Well,
you
they
have to
didn't
hire?
have to do that.
But
They
why?
chose to do that.
Yeah, but at that
because
point,
there's
the
a vacuum.
well
The
is
medical
still,
examiner had
yes.
already,
Yeah, but the well
so
had
they
been
didn't think they were going to like the answer they got from the medical examiner.
not so much that is that the well had been so poisoned by them
Right.
that there's a lack of trust that they're going to get the right
Yeah, it
answer.
was the very thing that led to this whole incident, this lack of trust.
There are a lot of things that obviously the police department can do to improve the way they handle themselves, but ultimately what people want to know here is, why did this police officer shoot this kid, and what were some of, what was going through his head, and to what extent did, the makeup of this police department or their philosophy about policing play a role in that? That's really what we need to get a handle on. And all this other stuff, this unleashed all of these pent-up tensions about of racial inequality and things like that. And those are great discussions to have, and we should have them. But what we need to, the issue here is, why did this police officer do that? And what contributed to it, and what can be done to prevent it from
And the
happening?
distrust pre-existed the incident.
Yes, that's
Right,
what I
right.
was
And
going to
that's
say.
an
Exactly.
automatic default position, and it's a position held by people who make an industry out of rubbing race relations
Oh,
raw.
I don't think, I mean, no, and that
absolutely
there
do.
are, I mean, come on, in many of these communities, you know, black people do not feel as though the policemen are their friends, and vice versa. I mean, you do have that rub, and that's because of actual confrontations as
That's-
opposed
That's
to.
also
And
a
that's a
leadership
subject-
issue.
subject
They're led to
for
think those things.
Another opinion show, because that is clearly, you know, one of the underlying issues we have to worry about in Cleveland and other communities where there is this
Right.
longstanding lack of trust
Automatic
between the
mistrust.
community and the police, and how much that feeds the fire when you have an incident like that.
But
Anyway.
you have, in the crime stats that were released between January and April by the Missouri Department of Public Safety for Ferguson, blacks were arrested 8 times, at a rate of 8 times the number of whites. So, I
So,
mean, there's
About 80% of the
data.
population, too.
There is
No.
clearly a lot
They're
more
like a
to
two-thirds.
mine in this.
70-30.
Thank you for joining us. This has been the
they're all
opinion show
criminals?
for August 20th. We would like to hear,
they're all
clearly we're not done
say?
talking on
No,
this
the
subject,
numbers
but
are
we're out of
numbers.
time. We'd like to hear your point of view in the comments. Thank you for tuning in.